So welcome everyone to DigVentures Pop into the Past workshop for Garnock Connections. This is one of our workshops in a series for the Garnock Connections Landscape project. I think several of you are quite familiar with the project now and have been involved over the last few months, but some of you I think are quite new, and definitely some people who have signed up to receive just the recording are very new to the project as well. So for their benefit, I'm going to give a little bit of a background to the project, just my sort of a normal quick introduction to it. So just bear with me, those of you that have heard this before. So Pop into the Past is a workshop in our series for Garnock Connections, and Garnock Connections is a landscape partnership here in Scotland, which covers a large swathe of North Ayrshire and runs into a couple of the adjacent counties to Renfrewshire and East Ayrshire. Now, the project is led by the RSPB, who are based in Lochwinnock, and it's funded by the NLHF, which is the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And you can see the project area just here. So this sort of blue dotted line around the edge just here represents the project area. So the project area follows the River Garnock from its source in the Clyde-Muirshill Regional Park. The river sort of runs through both natural and urban areas, and it goes all the way down to the sea, just down at the very bottom there. So we also are incorporating the Three Towns area on the coast as well into the project. Now, the aim of the Landscape Partnership is to promote and conserve the incredible natural, built and cultural heritage of the region, and there are about 25 individual projects that are going on as part of Garnock Connections. And it's really everything from planting flowers for bees, through to remeandering of streams, to archaeology, which is where DigVentures comes in. So we've been commissioned to deliver the archaeological side of the project, and we're running these workshops to help people develop their heritage skills, like how to do archaeological research, how to do desk-based assessments from home. We've done workshops on how you can record oral histories or film short films about heritage as well. So lots and lots of different skills that you can learn as part of this project. And we'll also be running a dig as well in a month's time that you just heard Colin and I there talking a little bit about, which is especially exciting. And I suppose I should introduce myself as well now that I've introduced the project. So for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Harriet. I'm a community archaeologist. I work for DigVentures. And my role is incredibly varied. Working for a small archaeological company, you'll find me doing all sorts of different things, from running workshops like this to teaching people how to do archaeology out in the field. I work a lot with school children around the country as well and teach them about archaeology and history. And occasionally you'll find me designing and running temporary exhibitions and online museums as well. So it's probably an important place for me to note that although this is all about exhibitions, I am not a museum curator, I'm not a museum professional, but I have got a fair bit of experience in designing exhibitions that can be run by sort of non-museum professionals. So trust me when I say I know that it is a sort of big, scary thing to think about taking on, but it is a really exciting thing to do from experience as well, and it is very doable. Even if you haven't studied museums, you know, if you're doing it relatively small scale, it's not rocket science, and you can definitely do it. So you'll always have support from me doing these kinds of things. So in this workshop, we're going to be talking about exhibitions, how we can do them, why we have them, and what makes them important. So to start with, I thought it would be good if we just sort of began with a little bit of background into exhibitions and how they came to be something that almost everyone will experience at some point in their life, one way or another. So, oh, there we go, big thank you. So what is an exhibition? So here we've got sort of something that you might typically see, a statue in a glass case, in a sort of white room, on a plinth. And that's sort of what we typically think of as an exhibition, isn't it? Sort of objects in cases. I think we're probably all familiar with what an exhibition is, but just so that we have some definitions that we can use as we go through this workshop, I'm going to sort of give a definition of the term. So essentially the word exhibition means a collection of curated items that are on display. And commonly we associate exhibitions with art galleries and museums or libraries and fairs, but they can happen just about anywhere. So exhibitions became established as part of our culture in the 19th century. You know, this came about with very well-known exhibitions like the Great Exhibition in the mid-1800s, which really popularised the idea as part of our culture. But they had been held for hundreds of years prior to this as well. So we know of exhibitions dating back to the mid-1600s, and presumably people had curated, collected and displayed objects in one way or another, even further back in time from that as well. So in the 21st century, the term exhibition has expanded beyond what we sort of typically used to think of as an exhibition. So while museums and galleries do still feature prominently in our understanding of exhibitions and how we think of them, we're now a lot more flexible about what an exhibition can be and where they can happen. And that's really good news for us as ordinary people, or people working in museum adjacent professions, or volunteering for organisations who aren't curators for big museums. It's much more common now that we can put on our own exhibitions in venues of our choosing, meaning that we can make our heritage more accessible to even more people, which is really important. And this is important because really the purpose of an exhibition is to share something with the general public, isn't it? You know, they help us to facilitate learning, they help us to inspire fascination with the subject, and to promote heritage. So the more people that we can share that with, then the better, in my opinion. So before I go on to the next slide, I just want to note that from here on out, when I talk about an exhibition, I'm going to be talking specifically about exhibiting archaeology and history and heritage. And it's not that I don't want to include other types of exhibition, but I do need to keep this on time. So I'm going to try and just stick to one subject here. So what can an exhibition be? In the field of heritage and archaeology, we typically think of exhibitions being large collections of objects on display in glass cases. And maybe you'll have a wee card explaining what the object is, what period it dates to, maybe who it belonged to. And this kind of exhibition is what I'll refer to in this workshop as a traditional exhibition. But as I said, increasingly the boundaries of exhibitions are being pushed, and we're constantly seeing new innovative ways of artifacts and heritage being shared and displayed. So let's have a look at some of the non-traditional ways that we can exhibit archaeology and heritage. So we have virtual museums, we've got temporary exhibitions, pop-up museums and other exhibits. And I'll go into all of these in a little bit more detail in the next slides. But really the point of me putting these together as a group just to introduce you to these ideas is that the world is your oyster now, really, when it comes to exhibitions. So you can stick to the traditional methods if you want to, but there are so many ways that people are being really, really creative with the way that they are exhibiting heritage and archaeology. So let's have a look at some of these in more detail. So to start off with, I thought we would cover virtual exhibitions or virtual museums. So these are two different terms. So virtual exhibitions and virtual museums shouldn't be necessarily conflated, although there is obviously a big overlap. What I mean by virtual exhibition is a collection of artifacts where you could go and see those artifacts in person as well. But there are now also virtual museums which are entirely online. So there's a bit of a distinction there between those two terms. So these virtual museums are museums which don't actually have a physical space at all. And for example, there's the International Museum of Women, which I believe is headquartered in San Francisco, and it's entirely an online museum. There's no physical museum that you can go and see. And the Tucson LGBTQ museum as well, which I believe is headquartered in Tucson, Arizona. And we're seeing more and more of these cropping up. More commonly though, you'll see virtual exhibitions run by museums that do still have a physical space, but they're digitizing their collections so that they can share them online, which increases their reach, but they do still maintain their physical exhibit so that people can go and visit in person too. So for example, the British Museum has been doing a lot of this recently, and now has quite a big online catalogue of artifacts that you can see and interact with online. So we've got a picture here, sort of cropped into in this this PowerPoint slide, but you can just about see it, which is what I would say is DigVentures' most interesting virtual exhibition to date. We've done a few of these, and I'm not just saying that because I coordinated this particular one, but this is our Etched in Stone project, and I want to show you this one not out of vanity, but because this project was based around the stones that you can see on in the picture there. They are Anglo-Saxon name stones and they're quite rare. There's only been about 30, I think low 30s. We've added quite a lot to this number in the last few years that we've been digging at Lindisfarne. So I'm not sure of the exact number right now, but it's 30 something. And they have only been found in the northeast of England. And there are different styles which seem to be regional. So the Lindisfarne stones, as you can see in the picture there, have sort of these round tops, and others that have been found in Hartlepool and County Durham tend to have sort of squarer tops, but they are viewed as a distinct group of objects that are quite particular to the sort of northeast Northumbria region of England, and are specific to the sort of early Anglo-Saxon time period as well. So we're talking sort of 7th, 8th, 9th century objects. Now, the kind of sad thing about these artifacts is that although they are very much a distinct group of objects, they've never physically been all in the same room. So there's only 30 or so of them, but they've never ever been displayed together in a physical space. The British Museum has a couple of them, the National Museum of Scotland has a few more, several are held in storage by Historic England, and there are others in museums in Newcastle and Hartlepool. So when we started finding these at our dig on Lindisfarne, we came up with the idea that it would be amazing to be able to display all of these together. Now, the problem with that is that when you're dealing with so many different organisations, I don't want to say it's impossible that they could ever be displayed together in a physical space, but it's highly unlikely that you would be able to coordinate between so many different organisations and get them all in one room at the same time. So we came up with this concept for a virtual exhibition of these stones. So myself and a couple of colleagues went all over the country with our 3D modelling equipment, and we made 3D models of each of these stones so that they could finally be displayed together, albeit in a digital capacity. So you can go and have a look at this. It's on the DigVentures website. I can provide a link to it in the email that goes out after this workshop if you want to have a little look at how we did it. But it really is a sort of amazing project. It was an amazing project to work on and sort of finally get these all side by side. which was fantastic. So virtual exhibitions, they give you a lot of freedom in many ways, but there are some things that you should be aware of if you go down this road. So it can be difficult to get hold of the artifacts you want to digitize if they're with other institutions. The majority of my time on the Etched in Stone project was just coordinating all of the paperwork that went along with trying to get access to these stones in the various museums that they were being held in. And yeah, I mean, it's time consuming and it can be quite difficult. There's a lot of obstacles to overcome to do it, but again, it's not impossible. And you do need to be able to either take high quality photos or even better produce 3D models, because that's going to give people a better opportunity to interact with these, and it sort of gives them a way of interacting that you wouldn't be able to do in a museum. So if you were to go and see an object in a museum, you'd be able to see it in its case. You might not be able to see all around it, and you know, being able to do a 3D model gives people a way to look at it from all different angles. They're not limited to the way that it's being displayed in the case, which I think is really cool. But of course, you will need to learn how to do this. But the good news is that creating 3D models, again, it's not rocket science. It's relatively easy to do, provided that you have a sort of decent camera and some software, some of which is actually free as well to download. So it's very doable. And if anyone does want to learn how to make 3D models of artifacts, DigVentures does run an online course on how to do that. So you're more than welcome to get in touch with me if you would like access to that course. Now, just as an aside, it is something that we will have hopefully an opportunity to do at the Dig in at Garnock Castle in July. So if any of you are coming to that, then do let me know if this is something that you really want to have a go at, because we can certainly make time to give you an opportunity to do that. So the next thing that you need to think about if you're doing a virtual exhibition is where on the internet your exhibition will live. So if you have a website, or if your organisation has a website, this might be a really straightforward decision, and it's just a case of setting up a page on that website for them to live. But if you don't have a website, or you're doing this sort of for a personal exhibition rather than for an organisation, you might need to think about whether or not you want to set up some social media that this could be hosted on. Things like Sketchfab are great for 3D models. Facebook or Instagram could work if you wanted something really low maintenance as well. So yeah, there are lots and lots of different options. And finally, you need to think about maintaining your collection as well. So this is something that we found for the Etched in Stone project. For a long time, there was this sort of static number of about 31 stones. I think a couple had gone missing that were discovered in the 19th century, but that number had stayed quite static. And when we started digging at Lindisfarne, suddenly we started finding more and more of them. So we've had to make sure that we maintain this museum as more of them have been found.
Yeah, later we need to check on your BBC Extra, yeah?
I'm just going to see who that is so I can mute you. Johanna, if you could mute whoever it is, because I can't see, I'm afraid. Thank you. Right, so the next type of exhibition that I wanted to talk about is pop-up exhibitions. Now, the term pop-up exhibition is often used interchangeably with a temporary exhibition or a temporary museum. And I've definitely been guilty of this myself, but there is a meaning for pop-up exhibition that is quite specific. So for this workshop, I'm going to talk about this very specific type of exhibition, but don't be surprised if you hear this term used in a slightly different way. So the term pop-up exhibition or pop-up museum was basically created to represent a specific situation in which you invite people to a venue and you ask them to bring an object along with them to be displayed very temporarily. So often, you know, you might just have these on display for an hour or a couple of hours, or maybe a day or two at the absolute most. And people are generally encouraged to interact with the objects in a way that you really wouldn't be able to in a traditional museum setting. So depending on what the objects are, you might be able to pick them up. There might be workshops around the artifacts, perhaps sketching them, creating poetry about them, for example, or encouraging conversations about them with other visitors. And normally there's a particular theme to this. So you might have a theme like memories from your childhood, where you get people to bring along photographs or objects that they, you know, have really strong memories of, linked to their childhood. There was one that I saw that was what's in your pocket, and it was just inviting people who were walking along this particular street just to drop anything that was just happened to be in their pocket into the museum to display for a couple of hours.
I'm busy, guys. Please.
Oh,
I'm busy at the moment. Come through if you want something.
there we go. Sorry about that. Yes, so the aim of pop-up exhibitions is normally to encourage discourse and conversation around the theme. So they can often be very topical, and be on all sorts of sort of cool and quirky subjects, and they're really fun to organise as well. Now, how can we do this for archaeology? Well, DigVentures has run pop-up museums like this alongside a number of our field schools. So in the past, we've encouraged people to bring artifacts that they might have at home to our sites. So it's not uncommon that people find archaeology while they're digging in their garden. You know, they might find a little bit of pottery. I recently found, I think it was about sort of late 18th, early 19th century pottery, as I was digging a flower bed. It now lives on my mantelpiece. I know that one of my colleagues found a human skeleton in her back garden. So there really is all sorts, although she didn't keep that, just to clarify. That was reported to the police and dealt with accordingly. So yeah, it's really not uncommon to find archaeology, especially as you're, you know, walking along the beach, walking the dog, along fields and things. And these finds often end up in people's sheds or on mantelpieces. They sit for years and years. People know that they're old, but they might not necessarily know what they are. So we've invited people to bring these kinds of things to pop-up museums at our digs. And it gives people a chance to talk with our finds experts and get a little bit more information about them, to help identify what they are, when they date to, and it also allows other local people to see what's been found, you know, locally to them as well. But it is worthwhile me mentioning that although it's a really great idea, it's a really nice thing to do. Under the particularly in Scotland, under the treasure trove scheme, all archaeological finds must be reported, pretty much no matter what they are. So people can be a little bit reluctant to bring things along because they might think, you know, we're going to take them off them. And most of the time, this wouldn't be the case. So if you do facilitate an event like this, it's worth seeking advice from Treasure Trove, just to ensure that you can be compliant with reporting rules, and that no one is going to get into trouble. So moving on, the next one I want to talk about is temporary exhibitions. So temporary exhibitions might be touring exhibitions. Often they will go around the world, you know, being shown in different museums, or they can be exhibitions that are just on for a very short period of time or relatively short period of time. They might last from a few days to a number of months, but their defining feature is that they have very much a set end date, after which the display will be dismantled and either moved elsewhere or back into storage. They might feature artefacts that are on loan from other places, or artefacts that can't be permanently displayed for other reasons. Now, temporary exhibitions are still likely to feature objects in glass cases in the traditional sort of sense of an exhibition, but they will normally have a very distinct theme. And the British Museum is an example of one of these big museums that pretty much always has a series of temporary exhibitions on the go. So recent examples include Arctic culture and climate, and inspired by the East, how the Islamic world influenced Western art. And typically these kinds of exhibitions will last for about 2 or 3 months. But temporary exhibitions aren't just limited to big, well-known institutions, and it's now very common for small organisations to organise their own temporary museums or temporary exhibitions. And at DigVentures, we have run several of these in the past as well, so in churches and community centres. And we've even had them outdoors last year during coronavirus restrictions as well. So there are loads and loads of different ways that you can do this. Now, temporary exhibitions might be sort of smaller scale than a sort of ordinary museum. So it's not uncommon to find that they feature different kinds of media as well, to sort of bulk them out a bit and give a bit more context for the objects that are on display. So, for example, when DigVentures ran a temporary museum on the Hartlepool Headland in 2019, we did have a collection of artefacts in a case on display, but we also had a projection of a supporting presentation as well, which showcased aerial footage of the place where the artifacts had been found. It included an animated artist's interpretation of the first Viking raid, because it was all about Lindisfarne and the objects that we've been finding there. And visitors could also access the Etched in Stone virtual museum at the same time. So we had a computer right beside the display cases, and people could use that computer and log on and view the virtual museum as well. So it kind of brought those two things together. And what I found from running that temporary exhibition was that it was a really, really good opportunity to work collaboratively to increase footfall to a particular venue, using the draw of the artifacts and the draw of the temporary exhibition to show off the assets of the venue by proxy. So the temporary exhibition on the Hartlepool Headland drew people to the church that's there. It's an older church. Parts of it date to the 16th century, excuse me. And it already had its own collection of Anglo-Saxon stone artefacts, which is freely accessible to the public, but which just isn't very well known about, or wasn't very well known about by local people. So by getting people into the church with the temporary exhibition that we ran, we were also able to raise awareness of a significant and culturally valuable local asset, which was a really great thing to be able to do. There we go. So other forms of heritage interpretation, and this is where you can get really creative, and you can see a picture here of my colleagues Jodie and Ginny doing an interpreted dance to the sound of trowels scraping the ground in one of our trenches. So this was just them having a bit of fun. I'm not expecting anyone to go out and do an interpretive dance about the archaeology and heritage that we have in the Garnock Connections project region. But it is something that you could consider if you wanted to. So there are other ways that you can exhibit heritage, because of course it doesn't just need to be about artifacts, it can also be about historical research. So there are plays, there's dance, there's art. There's one really great example actually of a dig we ran a few years ago down in Cornwall. We had a really big community presence on that dig. I think on the last day of the dig, there was sort of a mini festival that went on near to the site. And there was an artist there who had taken small amounts of our spoil from different parts of the site. And anyone who's ever worked on an archaeological site or done any kind of serious gardening, you'll know that soil is different colours in different places depending on the sort of taphonomic processes and what it's been subjected to. So there's a range of these colours of soil, and this artist had taken soil from different parts of the site and made them into paints which had different colours, and she got kids to do different paintings inspired by the archaeology with the soil from the dig, which was really cool. There's poetry, there's oral histories, photographs and videos. Obviously earlier in the series we discussed how to create short films, and that recording is available for anyone who hasn't seen that one yet to go and catch up on if you want to learn about creating short films about heritage. So what I wanted to do at this point is just show off one of my colleagues really. So Jodie, that you can see here in the photo, she's got her hands up by her face. She is our resident poet at DigVentures, and she wrote a poem about our time at Lindisfarne last year, and I'm just going to share that with you because Jodie has shown me that actually can be really, really powerful. So I'm just going to show her off a little bit. Here we go. This is a poem Jodie wrote last year.
I wrote a poem a couple of days ago. I do generally write poetry. My PhD is about art and creativity and archaeology together. Part of my research has been thinking about archaeological poetry, even if that's not really a thing. We've been excavating a cemetery with lots of human remains, so it's a bit of a reflection on what that feels like, and yeah, thinking through having that kind of interaction with somebody who's over 1,000 years old. Have you found the history of yourself away from your children? Here, with the painstaking scrape of soil away from bone, have you managed to cast yourself sideways across what it feels like to be human? Into the wind with the rattling seals and howl of the seabirds, have you felt the pressure of dirt against your every soft limb, made yourself sensitive to every smallest change, to the place where people have sighed into the ground, their feet turned in, and a dashed hope of life in the muddle at her waist? Have you wanted to capture everything? Every beam of sun and sand-blasted squint in your careful account of how you met them? On your knees, each record a prayer, each drawing a spell, as the singing drifts from the church, bringing us apart and together again. Thank you.
There we go. So just a very short clip there. I'm sure she won't appreciate me sharing that with you, but I thought that was a really nice example of how heritage can be interpreted through poetry, and you know, Jodie can speak on this far better than I can, but I found that one particularly powerful, and I wanted to share it with you. Moving on then, I want to talk next about where exhibitions can happen. Here we go. So, as I've discussed, archaeology exhibitions typically happen in museums, but non-traditional kinds can happen just about anywhere. So here are some ideas for where you might be able to hold a pop-up exhibition or a temporary exhibition. So we've got heritage spaces, and these are traditional spaces like museums and galleries, but also places perhaps like castles, for example. And these are places that people expect to find heritage and archaeology and history. And the fact that these spaces are traditionally used to share that kind of information it often means that they might have a dedicated space for exhibition, which does make your life a little bit easier as you're organising these kinds of things. But lots of us won't necessarily have access to a proper, I say proper in inverted commas, but a proper heritage space. So we can look to community spaces as well. So examples of these kind of spaces include churches, libraries, cafes, high streets, community centres, even art galleries and studios. I've seen displays and exhibitions in parks and green spaces, particularly throughout the last 18 months as well. There's a park very close to where I live in Glasgow, it's Maxwell Park, that during the Black Lives Matter protests last year put an exhibition on about the area's links to slavery, which was really powerful. That was all outdoors. It was kind of airing dirty laundry in the park, and they had sheets that had facts written on them that were displayed on a washing line there, which was really powerful. And a really creative use of that space to sort of build awareness. And these spaces have pros and cons. So community spaces have pros and cons. Sometimes you will need to adapt to working in quite a small space. It might not necessarily have the level of accessibility you would like. Alternatively, it might be much more accessible than traditional heritage spaces. So sometimes you'll benefit from that as well. Sometimes things like lighting might not be ideal, and outdoor spaces in particular can be a bit more difficult to have displays just from a logistical point of view. But usually you can work around most issues. So it's important just to be aware so that you can take steps to overcome any problems, and also be aware of the environment that you're putting any artifacts in as well. So if you have artifacts that require specific conditions for their conservation, then you might need to, then you will need to ensure that your space is appropriate for that. So what about digital spaces, finally? So we touched a little bit on this earlier, but just to go into a little bit more detail and a few more ideas, you can have purpose-built websites, such as an organisation's website, perhaps a blog website, which are relatively easy to build. You can use social media. So I've seen exhibitions, digital exhibitions going up on Instagram in particular, because it really lends itself to sharing videos and photos. But other forms of social media can work as well. Sketchfab is sort of the go-to place to host any 3D models, and you can also embed 3D models that are hosted on Sketchfab into most websites as well. And you can even look to YouTube. So particularly if you're doing things with video, creating videos of 3D models or other footage, you can utilize YouTube. And again, YouTube videos can be embedded into most websites. And you might use a number of these to host various aspects of your exhibition. So next slide, how to build your exhibition in 10 steps. I was going to take a break here, but to be honest, I think we probably don't need to. I'm just going to power on through, I think, because we're probably more than halfway through now. So rather than taking our normal 10-minute break, we'll just go straight through and finish a little bit early. So building your exhibition in 10 steps. The first step is finding your venue. So this is probably the most important thing to start off with, because it's what's going to inform how many artifacts you have on display, how you display them. So my first step is always to book that venue first. Go and see the space, obviously subject to restrictions at the moment. Make sure you know how much physical space you have and how you can utilize it effectively. And this goes for digital spaces as well. So understand where you're going to host your website if it's not hosted already, how much digital space that they will give you, because you'll need to be aware of this, particularly if you're uploading very high resolution photos. Just make sure you're aware of the sort of capacity for your digital exhibition if you're going down that route. The next thing to think about is the purpose of your exhibition. So defining your purpose. What is it? You might be trying to raise awareness of your site or research. You might simply want to show off great finds to the public. Maybe you've been metal detecting for a few years and you've got loads of things that you just want to show people. But make sure you're clear on what that purpose is, because it's going to inform your narrative. So deciding on your narrative. So are you trying to tell the whole timeline of a particular place, or just, do you want to just give people a little snapshot into a particular period that you've been investigating? You might want to tell the story of how your discoveries were made, or how you've gone about doing your research and the process that you've been through, and that's fine too. But again, just making sure that you're clear on this will make sure that you've got a really great exhibition at the end of it. So the next thing to think about is choosing your star artifact. And again, I've put artifact here, but if you're presenting sort of heritage research, for example, where there are no sort of finds or artifacts, sort of choosing your headline for the exhibition is really important. How are you going to get people in? What's going to be the attraction? And there might be times when you really just want to do an exhibit of 100 sherds of green glazed pottery, but most of the time there will need to be a star of the show that's going to draw people in and get people through the door, or the virtual door. You might not necessarily have a fantastic or rare artifact to show off, but that's okay, as long as you know sort of what the headline is, and you can market it in a way that will draw people in, then that's the main thing. And even if you don't have anything particularly wonderful or surprising, you can make up for it by having a unique venue. So is there a place that people normally wouldn't be able to have access to, and the sort of draw will be just being able to come into that space. And you might be able to think of some other kind of unique selling point as well. Again, it's just about being creative with this, and having a really good think about it. So next thing will be picking out any other artifacts. And one of the things that I think is really tempting to do is, we want to show off everything that we've found, and that goes for heritage research as well. There are so many times when I'm doing a desk-based assessment or something, and I just want to talk about absolutely everything, but that can be really overwhelming for people, and it's important to kind of pick your battles in a sense. And again, this goes back to your narrative as well. So trying to stick to that and choosing artifacts that are going to support that story, and help showcase it, is really important. You don't necessarily need to put absolutely everything into your exhibition. The other thing to think about next is your supporting media. So as you can see in the photo on the slide here, there are some cards underneath the name stones that are on display, just giving a little bit of information about each one. There's not sort of pages and pages of text there, it's just one paragraph. And we tried to keep it nice and short, so that people could read that easily and take that information in easily. And it doesn't just have to be cards next to artifacts either. So you can use photographs, you could use videos or presentations. Just think about what you want to do to support that story, help tell your story and make your exhibition a hit. It's important to be aware of your available space. So if you have small cases like the ones that you can see in the photo, if we'd have chosen to have, cards with hundreds of words on there, it would make it look really cluttered. And again, this can be really off-putting for people, even if the information is really fascinating and really great. And if you feel that you need to give more context or description, now is your chance to get inventive. Can you think of other more digestible ways of presenting that? Again, getting creative and just giving a bit of thought. So next thing is advertising it. So it's all well and good setting up this presentation and setting up your exhibition, but you need to get the word out to the public as well. So once you have your venue and you've booked your dates, it's time to get the word out. You can use social media. You could contact local papers with a press release. Putting up flyers in community spaces has worked quite well for DigVentures in the past. And sending out emails to any mailing lists that you might have, or people who are subscribed to your website or blog or newsletters. And what I would recommend is doing a combination of all of these. As always, get the word out in as many ways as you can to get people in. So the next thing on day or a few days before you go live with your exhibition is setting it up. So the important thing really is to be aware of the aesthetics of your display as you set it up. It can be difficult for people to enjoy your exhibition if there are too many words to read. And from a practical point of view, it's important to keep people moving through the space as well. So if you put a case or you put a poster or something up right as people walk in the door, it's going to sort of create a bottleneck effect, and you need to think about the way that people are going to move through the exhibition space, especially when it's busy as well. So very wordy displays can hold people up and interrupt that flow, and just be aware of how long it would take people to digest the information and the artifacts that you are putting up on display. If you have supporting media like videos or presentations, be aware of how long they are and where people are going to view them. If it is a sort of longer presentation or video, and by that I mean something that's much more than a couple of minutes, I would normally think about giving people a place to sit down and be able to watch that. So you might want to think about just putting seating in so that people can enjoy it comfortably. And think about the practical aspects too. So this is something that I've found particularly when we've used a projector in sort of spaces that aren't necessarily created for exhibitions. Sometimes lighting is just really poor, and if you are using things like projectors or screens, it can be, glare and things like that can make it visually just difficult. So make sure that your picture is clear if you have things like this on display. There was one time I actually needed to put up a gazebo in a church space, just so that we had some deflection from the natural sunlight, which just streamed in and meant that you couldn't see anything that I had running on the projector. So just be aware of that before you go live, and think about the way that people move around the cases as well. Can they actually see all of the artifacts that you've got on display? Do you need a sort of 360 view, or can they be lined up against walls? Again, this will be informed by the type of space you're in as well. So there's a lot to think about. The next step is figuring out your security, and I would do this sort of basically at the same time that you're going and finding your venue. It's something that is often overlooked, but it's important. So if your exhibition is going to last more than a day, think about the overnight. So are you going to leave your artifacts in your exhibition space? Is that venue secure? Do you need to take everything with you at the end of the day or lock them up? And this goes a little bit for during the day as well, particularly if the exhibition is going to be unstaffed at any point, or if you maybe have points in the day, lunch times and things where you might be down to a sort of skeleton crew of volunteers or staff members. If things are left unattended, it's unusual, but there is obviously there are bad eggs out there who potentially could steal something. So just be aware of that. Think about whether or not there are going to be opportunities for bad things to happen, and make accommodations for it. So it might be as simple as just closing up the venue during lunch times, if it's a really little space, or just simply making sure that you've got enough staff or volunteers on at any one time. So the final sort of other things, miscellaneous things to think about. We've just touched on this briefly, but depending on the size of your exhibition, making sure that you have enough staff to make it happen. This will sometimes depend on the level of interaction that you want people to have as well. So we have found that the way that we like doing things is having plenty of staff on hand to really be able to talk to people in either a one-on-one way or in very small groups, to answer questions, to give more context around what we're doing. So even for quite small exhibitions, normally we have at least 2 or 3 members of staff on site at any one time. So that's something to think about. You might not need that many. You might be very happy to kind of set up your exhibition and then walk away from it completely. It's really up to you, but it is something to think about. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about under this kind of other things to think about is funding and fees. So you might want to offer your exhibition for free, which is great if you can, but just be aware that there can be overhead costs that need to be covered. So sometimes you will have to charge people a fee to cover these costs. Now you might want to apply for a grant to cover that. Or you might want to simply charge people for their ticket. And just be aware that event management companies and organisations such as Eventbrite, who you all will be familiar with because I know that you signed up through Eventbrite for this workshop, they do charge a commission for paid events. And it can amount to quite a big chunk of your revenue. So you'll need to account for this and make sure that you are completely clear on what fees you will be charged if you are using external organisations to ticket your event. And it can be worthwhile doing a bit of research into ticketing platforms as well, because some are better than others. And the very last thing that I wanted to talk about today is permissions. So being aware of copyright, borrowing artifacts, and getting permission to view or handle artifacts on storage or on display in other places. So designing your own exhibition should be fairly easy if you or your organisation own the artefacts that you want to display, and if you own any other intellectual property that you want to put on display, for example, photographs or videos and things. But there are some instances where it can get more complicated, and you might need to obtain permissions for your exhibition. So in my experience, particularly this applies to photographs. So often with DigVentures, you know, we have control over the artifacts that we want to display. They're in our possession, so that's not a problem. But sometimes there are really, really gorgeous photographs that people on site have taken as they've been volunteering with us, for example. Or that just visitors have taken and tagged us in online. And it's important to be aware of the fact that in most cases, the photographer owns the image. So if you want to use it, make sure that you have permission from the person who took the photograph, or that they've signed a waiver, you know, meaning that basically you can use their photographs if they've sort of joined you for an event and shared those photographs with you. And this is particularly important if you are charging entry to the exhibition, because it can then be classed as sort of commercial use of the images. So then it can get quite sticky if you don't have the right permissions. Now, the other thing to think about is if you want to borrow artifacts from other museums or collections, and this probably won't apply to anyone who is just doing this as an individual, but if any of you are volunteers for heritage organisations or you work at heritage organisations, this might be something that you would look to do. Now, the process for borrowing artefacts varies between institutions, so different places have different policies. So it's, you know, basically just a case of getting in touch with the museum or store where the artefact is kept, and you know, finding out what their process is for borrowing it. Sometimes you'll be rejected, and that's frustrating, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the end of the world. And you know, don't be disheartened if you're not allowed to borrow the artifact. You can again get creative other ways that you can display it. So you know, can you go down the digital route? Could you get permission to view the artifact or handle it in storage or where it's kept, to create a 3D model of it, for example, that you could then display? And the thing to be aware of when you do this is that often your institution who is loaning out the artifact for the 3D model to be made or the photographs to be taken, they might want shared use of the images or the final model as well. So often they'll ask you for a waiver so that they can use that for their purposes as well, and you just do a sort of shared Creative Commons license on that, which sounds complicated, but often it's just a form to sign, so it's not too much of a big deal. And that's everything that I wanted to talk about today. So I think we're about half an hour early from where we would normally finish, so it's been a shorter one today. But before I let you go, is there any questions? Does anyone want to ask any questions or have any comments they would like to make? Please feel free.
Okay.
Yep, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. This sounds all very good, and I've been able to visit several exhibitions at different times, even given free entry to ones in the British Museum. A friend of mine was working there and helped me through that. Anyway, the thing I was thinking of, and this is something I have actually discussed with the British Museum through paperwork, is accessibility. I find it very difficult to read writing that's right on the floor. Under those circumstances, I need to lie on the floor,
Right,
with a piece of, you know, electronic tech to actually look at read what I'm looking at, which is not exactly satisfactory. So, I mean, we live in a technical age where things like QR codes
yes,
can help, but sight disability is not the only one.
yeah,
You know, if you're doing a video with words, then you need to worry about people who are deaf.
yes,
and then people who've got mobility difficulties as well, getting in, getting out, are they at the right height to see stuff?
Yeah.
The longer the exhibition, clearly the bigger the deal, but nonetheless, it would seem to me that you'd need to take some sort of care of that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I probably should have included a slide on accessibility issues and catering for people who, you know, have disabilities or need different ways of accessing displays. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about that. You're absolutely right. And one of the things that I think, as you touched on, is the ways that we can use technology to cater for people, and often just having conversations with people as well, and being aware of the needs of people, keeping yourself up to speed with the sort of latest techniques, if you like, for catering for people of all abilities. I've heard of people running exhibitions and having sort of autism awareness days specifically for people on the autism spectrum to come and I won't lie, I'm not completely up to speed on all of that, but they've done research and found ways that they can make their exhibition more accessible for people with autism or who are on the autism spectrum, and I think that's a really great thing that we're seeing more and more commonly happening in museums. And we have a really good opportunity with temporary exhibitions, especially because we have more flexibility over the space that we choose and the venue that we choose, to make sure that we can cater to people of all abilities. So it is definitely something that you should be aware of if you are setting up an exhibition, definitely. Thank you for raising that, Mark.
Oh, you're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? I can see there's actually quite a lot in the group chat, so let me just have a quick read through. Yes, all the previous sessions are available as recordings. There'll be an email that goes out after this workshop. It's normally sort of early evening time, around 5:30, 6 o'clock, that will go out, Phoenix. And I'll put a link in there to the website where we host all of the previous workshops as well, so you can go back and watch any of those that you're interested in. Mark, you asked, does this online digitized collection enable further study of these objects? Were you talking about the etched in stone?
Yeah, I mean, it seems that you can go, when I know some of these techniques for 3D scanning are really quite detailed, which means that you could start taking a closer look, without bothering anybody once you've got the scan.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can also do it with the whole collection and see if you can pick up sort of styles and stuff like that, maybe even individual authors, or I don't know.
Precisely. No, you're absolutely right. Again, so this is what I mean by digital collections, giving people a level of accessibility that you just wouldn't have in a museum. So you can do some really cool things with some of the photogrammetry software, playing around with the light. So you kind of create digital light that shines across an artifact, and we found this particularly useful for the name stones that we were studying for the Etched in Stone project, because some of them are quite degraded, they're very, very faded, the carvings are very faint, and if you play around with the angle of the light, often it will cast a shadow, and you can see stuff that pops out suddenly that wasn't visible before. And yes, you probably could do that in a physical space, but you'd need to be up close and personal with that object, and if it's behind a glass case, you're not going to get to be able to do that. So it does definitely gives you a really good opportunity to look at these objects in a different way.
Of course, it's interesting thing with those sort of highly worn down things is, especially if you've pricked them out of the earth, is that they are actually worn to thinness in antiquity,
Yes, yeah,
rather than being worn by the just being under soil, because that can actually keep things in pristine condition.
oh
It's
yeah,
amazing to
absolutely.
think how, with something so worn, that actually it would have been a precious object to people at the time, and they'd have been
Yeah,
touching it and
yeah,
contemplating the meaning of it
yeah, absolutely.
through
And
time.
Colin, have you got a comment yet?
No, it was actually just when you're talking about the light. Now it's RTI,
Yes.
it's called.
Yeah.
Reflective technology, I can remember. I can't remember what the I is. We have used that on the Adrosian sarcophagus in the Heritage Centre.
Yeah.
And we saw markings that had never been seen before.
Yeah.
And it's actually sitting in this cupboard behind me at the moment. And it is our intention to get up into the graveyard on the hill and use it on some of the gravestones, etc., to try and pick out some of the wording that we can't make out and maybe been lost for a while.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
looking to use that technology, and that's available. That's not a Drossen Castle heritage. That is, it tends to reside in the Heritage Centre, so it's available for everybody in the area
that's
to
really
use
good.
this equipment.
That's really good to know. Thank you for sharing that, Colin, because I certainly didn't know that equipment was available for anyone to use.
Yes, it's through Garnock Connections.
Ah, great. Okay.
It was, well, I'm going to say they were involved in putting it in place, but it's held at the SOC, it's the North Ayrshire Heritage Centre, and I just happen to have it because we seem to be the group that use it most.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're very active in the project, aren't you? So
Well, we try to be.
Excellent. I'm just going to go through a few more of these comments. Yep, a lot of comments on what you can do with 3D models. It's a really fascinating way of displaying artifacts and just getting up close and personal with them in a way that, as I say, you just wouldn't be able to. And Phoenix has rightly raised the point that Sketchfab had a policy of ownership on 3D models hosted through their site, which does need to be thoroughly read. Because yes, some cultural heritage and organisations, museums and sites don't always agree with it. That is correct. They recently changed some of their policies as well. So I know, I don't know the exact reason why, but some of our 3D models suddenly disappeared off the site. So just be aware that whenever you host anything, videos, photographs, 3D models through a third-party organisation, it's important to just be aware that sometimes they can go missing. So I would definitely have a backup kept somewhere else of any files that you've hosted elsewhere, so that you can find an alternative if that platform does delete them or go down. Yep, you can 3D print models as well. You're absolutely right. So we actually did this for one of the name stones from Lindisfarne, and we had it 3D printed in chocolate, which was quite cool. It was a sort of an idea that we had for our crowdfunding campaign, and people could crowdfund at a certain level, and then they got this gift of a chocolate Anglo-Saxon name stone from the 3D model that we'd created. But yes, most of the time it will be done in plastic or resin, and it is very precise. You're absolutely right. Yes, Jodie's poem, I don't know if she's published it, but it is going to be featured in a documentary that we're making about our site at Lindisfarne. So if you want news about that, you can sign up to DigVentures newsletter or become a subscriber. I think subscribers will get early access to that documentary. It should be coming out this summer. So it's not far away if anyone's interested in seeing more of Jodie. Yeah, RTI. And Louise, yes, the equipment that Colin's talking about is indeed available, usually held at the Heritage Centre. Thank you, Colin, for taking care of it. But yes, there needs to be training through Garnock Connections before use. So anyone who would like to find out more about that can get in touch with the North Ayrshire Heritage Centre, and Louise has kindly put a email address there. So if you don't mind, Louise, I will pop that in the email that goes out to people with the recording of this workshop, if that's okay. Is that all right?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say there is a special, there is special software you need to load onto your computer to use.
Yeah.
To take advantage of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a bit of training for anyone who wants to use that is probably worthwhile, definitely. So unless there are any more questions or comments from people, I'm going to wrap this up. This is the first one we finished early, so quite surprised at myself for that. I'm going to give myself a pat on the back. I hope you've all enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope that we'll see some of you on site at Garnock Castle next month. Please feel free to come up even if you're not booked onto the dig. We have lots and lots of free workshops going on at the same time, which are available to book through Eventbrite. Again, I'll put links in the email that goes out this evening, so you can sign up for those if you are local or willing to travel. And provided we're obviously all allowed to do so, which it looks like good news at the moment. So can you include links to the digs medias? Do you mean the things that I've mentioned in the presentation today, Phoenix? No, I don't. If the dig, yes, yeah, I can put a link to the websites and things that I've referred to today, certainly, and yeah, definitely I'll provide links to anything that I've mentioned specifically during the presentation. Excellent. All right then, everyone, I'm going to end this workshop then just now. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that we'll see you all very soon. Take care.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.